Story 1. Kim Jong-nam was born on May 10, 1971, in Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea. His father was Kim Jong-il, who would later become the country's leader. His mother was Song Hye-rim, a well-known actress. At the time of his birth, his father was married to another woman, so Kim Jong-nam's existence was kept secret for several years. He grew up knowing that his family held power, but his position was never simple. When he was a young boy, his mother traveled to Moscow for medical treatment. For a time, he lived apart from her and moved between different places. He did not have a stable home life like most children. His father sent him abroad to study, so he could be prepared for a future role. He attended school in Switzerland during the 1980s, and later he studied in Russia. These years gave him a view of the world outside North Korea that few others in his family had. As he became a young man, Kim Jong-nam was expected to follow his father's path. But his relationship with his father grew difficult. In 2001, he was caught trying to enter Japan using a fake Dominican Republic passport. He said he wanted to visit Tokyo Disneyland. The incident embarrassed the North Korean government, and after that, his father began to favor his younger half-brother, Kim Jong-un, as the future leader. Kim Jong-nam spent more and more time outside North Korea. By 2003, he was living in exile. He settled mainly in Macau, a region of China, and also stayed in other cities such as Beijing and Singapore. He lived a quiet life compared to his family. He did not speak publicly about politics. Instead, he was known to enjoy gambling at casinos and dining at restaurants. He used a false name, Kim Cole, when he traveled. He carried passports under that name and used it on social media and email. He married twice and had children. His son, Kim Han-sol, studied in Europe and lived outside North Korea as well. Kim Jong-nam kept in touch with his family, but stayed out of the public eye. He was careful about his safety because he knew his family in North Korea saw him as a threat. Still, he moved freely around Southeast Asia. He traveled to Malaysia, Singapore, and other countries without a large security team. In February 2017, he planned a short trip. He arrived in Malaysia on February 6th and traveled to the resort island of Langkawi on February 8th. He wanted to relax before returning to Macau. He had a flight scheduled for February 13th from Kuala Lumpur. At that point in his life, he was 45 years old, living in exile, and carrying the name Kim Cole wherever he went. He did not know that people had been watching him. On February 13th, 2017, Kim Jong-nam arrived at Kuala Lumpur International Airport. He had taken a flight from Langkawi and reached Terminal 2 sometime before 9 a.m. He was traveling under the false name Kim Cole, as he had done for many years. His plan was to take an AirAsia flight to Macau at 10:50 a.m. He walked into the departure hall on level 3, carrying a backpack. Inside the backpack was about $100,000 in cash and 4 North Korean passports, all bearing the name Kim Cole. At approximately 9 a.m., Kim Jong-nam was near a self-check-in kiosk. 2 women approached him from behind. One of them was a 25-year-old Indonesian woman named Siti Asia. The other was a 28-year-old Vietnamese woman named Don Thi Hung. Each woman had come to the airport that morning with a separate group of men. The women had been told they were taking part in a prank for a hidden camera television show. They had practiced similar pranks before in other locations, including airports and hotels. On this morning, the women carried the ingredients of a deadly chemical weapon called VX nerve agent. VX is a poison that stops the body's nerves from working. It can kill a person within minutes. The women did not know they were handling poison. Instead, they believed they were playing a prank on a stranger. Siti Asia had something on her hands, and Don Thi Hung had something on her hands. The 2 substances were separate when they approached Kim Jong-nam. When they touched his face, the 2 substances mixed together and became the lethal nerve agent. Don Thi Hung moved quickly, and wiped something on Kim Jong-nam's face. At the same time, City Asia held his face and covered it with a cloth that had also been treated with liquid. The whole action took only a few seconds. After they touched him, both women turned and walked away. They went to separate restrooms. Inside the restrooms, they washed their hands. They did not feel sick right away, though City Asia later said she vomited in the taxi after leaving the airport. The women then left the airport terminal. Don Tae-hung took a taxi at around 9:30 a.m. Kim Jong-nam did not know what had been put on his face. He walked toward the airport reception area and spoke to a receptionist. He told her that someone had grabbed him from behind and splashed liquid on his face. He said a woman had covered his face with a cloth that was wet. He was sweating and seemed to be in pain. Staff at the airport took him to the Menara Medical Clinic inside the terminal. At the clinic, a nurse and a doctor tried to help him. He was sweating heavily and was not fully responsive. His pupils had become very small. The medical staff gave him an injection of atropine, which is a drug used to treat nerve agent poisoning. They also gave him adrenaline and put a tube in his throat to help him breathe. Despite their efforts, his condition worsened. He was put on a stretcher and taken by ambulance to Putrajaya Hospital. About 15 to 20 minutes after the attack, while he was being transported to the hospital, Kim Jong-nam died. The poison had stopped his body from functioning. Later examinations showed that the VX nerve agent had affected his lungs, brain, liver, and spleen. After the attack, the two women did not know that the man had died. They believed they had performed a prank for a television show. They had been promised money for their performance, but they never received it. The men who had arranged the prank were North Korean. 4 of those men had been at the airport that morning. They watched the attack happen and then left the airport quickly. They flew out of Malaysia the same day, traveling through different countries before returning to North Korea. Other North Korean men who had been involved remained in Malaysia for a short time. One of them had recruited City Asia months earlier, telling her she was being hired as an actress for prank videos. Another had recruited Don Tae-hung in Hanoi. Both women had performed the prank multiple times before on other targets as practice. The men gave the women instructions about who to target. On the day of the attack, they described the target as a bald man in a jacket carrying a black bag. That matched Kim Jong-nam's appearance. The women approached him and carried out the act they had practiced. They did not know that the liquids on their hands were toxic. They did not know that the prank was actually an assassination. After Kim Jong-nam collapsed at the airport staff called for medical help. While he was being taken to the hospital, police at the airport began to review security camera footage. They saw 2 women approach a man who later became unwell. The police did not know immediately who the man was because he carried a passport under the name Kim Cole. It took time for Malaysian authorities to confirm that the dead man was Kim Jong-nam, the half-brother of North Korea's leader. The security footage gave the police clear images of the 2 women. On February 15th, 2 days after the attack, police arrested Don Tae-hung at the airport. She had returned there, still not knowing that the man had died. The next day, police arrested City Asia. A Malaysian man who was Asia's boyfriend was also picked up for questioning. The police then identified 4 North Korean men who had been at the airport with the women. Those 4 men had already left Malaysia by the time the police began looking for them. They flew to Jakarta, Dubai, and Vladivostok before arriving in Pyongyang. Malaysian police also arrested a North Korean man named Ri Jong-kol, who was living in Malaysia. But they later released him because there was not enough evidence to link him to the attack. 3 other North Korean suspects took shelter inside the North Korean embassy in Kuala Lumpur. The police could not enter the embassy to arrest them. Eventually, those men were allowed to leave Malaysia after being questioned. On February 24th, Malaysian police announced that the autopsy had found VX nerve agent on Kim Jong-nam's face. This discovery was important because VX is a chemical weapon, and its use in a public place showed the attack was planned and carried out with dangerous materials. The government of North Korea denied any involvement and said the man died of a heart attack. The North Korean ambassador to Malaysia accused the Malaysian government of working with North Korea's enemies. Malaysia responded by expelling the ambassador and canceling visa-free entry for North Korean citizens. The two countries also barred each other's citizens from leaving temporarily, creating a diplomatic standoff. The murder trial for Siti Aisyah and Don Ti-hung began in October 2017 at the High Court in Shah Alam, Malaysia. Both women pleaded not guilty. During the trial, the court heard from chemists, doctors, and police investigators. Evidence showed that traces of VX were found on the clothing and hands of both women. The defense lawyers argued that their clients believed they were taking part in a prank for a television show and did not know they were handling poison. They presented videos showing the women performing similar pranks before the attack. In March 2019, the Malaysian Attorney General dropped the murder charge against Siti Aisyah. She was released and returned to Indonesia. The decision was made after the Indonesian government sent a request for her release. Don Ti-hung remained on trial. On April 1, 2019, the murder charge against her was also dropped, and she pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of voluntarily causing hurt by dangerous means. She was sentenced to 3 years and 4 months in prison. Her sentence was reduced, and she was released on May 3, 2019, and returned to Vietnam. The 4 North Korean men who fled Malaysia were never arrested. Interpol issued red notices for them, but they remained in North Korea, where they could not be reached. No other individuals were ever charged with planning or ordering the assassination. The diplomatic relationship between Malaysia and North Korea broke down, and the two countries later severed ties. After the trial ended, Kim Jong-nam's body was returned to North Korea. His family did not claim him, and Malaysian authorities gave permission for the remains to be sent to Pyongyang. The two women returned to their home countries and continued their lives outside of prison. The assassination of Kim Jong-nam became known as one of the most brazen uses of a chemical weapon in a public place, but those who carried out the plan were never brought to justice. Story 2. Ghislaine Noelle Marion Maxwell was born on December 25, 1961, in a town called Maisons-Laffitte in France. She was the 9th and youngest child of her parents. Her father was Robert Maxwell, a man who had been born in Czechoslovakia and later became a powerful media owner in Britain. Her mother was Elizabeth, a French-born scholar. Ghislaine came from a mixed background. Her father was from a Jewish family, and her mother was from a French Protestant family called Huguenots. When Ghislaine was born, her family already had 8 other children. 2 days after her birth, her 15-year-old brother Michael was in a serious car accident. He fell into a long coma and died in 1967 when Ghislaine was 5 years old. Her mother later said that the accident affected the whole family deeply. She also said that Ghislaine showed signs of anorexia when she was still a very young child. Ghislaine grew up in a large 53-room mansion in Oxford, England. The house was called Headington Hill Hall. It was not only a home, but also the office of her father's publishing company, Pergamon Press. So the family lived in the same building where her father ran his business. Her mother raised all the children as Anglicans, even though their father was from a Jewish background. For school, Ghislaine first went to Oxford High School for Girls. When she was 9 years old, she was sent to Edgarleigh Hall, a preparatory school in Somerset. At 13, she went to Headington School, another school in Oxford. Later she studied for her A-levels at Marlborough College. After that she went to Balliol College, Oxford, where she earned a degree in modern history with languages in 1985. While she was at Oxford, she spent time with people who later became well-known, including Boris Johnson and Anna Pasternak. Ghislaine had a very close relationship with her father. People said she was his favorite child. According to stories, her father installed computers at her school in 1973, and her first job was learning to use a Wang 2200 computer and later writing code. Her father was also strict about her personal life. When she started at Oxford, he did not allow her to bring boyfriends home or to be seen with them publicly. In the 1980s, Ghislaine became a well-known figure in London's social scene. She started a women's club named after an old club called the Kit Kat Club. She also became a director of Oxford United Football Club while her father owned the team. She worked at a newspaper called The European, which her father had started. In 1986, her father had a new yacht built and named it the Lady Ghislaine in her honor. She spent a great deal of time on that yacht in the late 1980s. The yacht had a jacuzzi, a sauna, a gym, and a disco. Her father also set up a New York company for her that sold corporate gifts, but the company did not make much money. In January 1991, her father bought the New York Daily News newspaper. He sent Ghislaine to New York City to act as his representative there. This gave her entry into Manhattan's social world. Later that year, in May, she and her father traveled together on the Concorde to New York for business. In November 1991, her father's body was found floating in the sea near the Canary Islands, close to the yacht Lady Ghislaine. He had died under unclear circumstances. Ghislaine flew to Tenerife to handle his paperwork. She attended his funeral in Jerusalem, where Israeli leaders gave eulogies. At first, the death was ruled an accidental drowning. Years later, Ghislaine said she believed her father was murdered, not that he took his own life. After Robert Maxwell died, it came out that he had stolen money from the pension funds of the Mirror Group newspapers, one of his companies. More than £400 million were missing, and 32,000 people lost their pension money. Two of Ghislaine's brothers, Ian and Kevin, were arrested in 1992 and charged with fraud related to the pension scandal. They were found not guilty in 1996. Shortly after her father's death, Ghislaine moved to the United States. Some reports say she bought a one-way ticket on the Concorde to New York in November 1992 because she felt uncomfortable in Britain after the pension scandal. She had a trust fund set up by her father that gave her an annual income of £80,000. By 1992, she was living in an apartment in New York that belonged to a friend from Iran. She worked at a real estate office on Madison Avenue and was seen socializing with celebrities. Accounts differ about when Ghislaine first met the American financier Jeffrey Epstein. Some say her father introduced them in the late 1980s. Others say they met at a party in New York in the early 1990s. By February 1993, they were known to be associated with each other. In the early 1990s, she had a romantic relationship with Epstein that lasted for several years. Even after the romantic part ended, she remained closely connected to him for more than 25 years. People who worked for Epstein later said that he called her his main girlfriend. She hired and supervised his household staff. In 1995, Epstein named one of his companies the Ghislaine Corporation. She was a qualified helicopter pilot and would fly him to his private island in the Caribbean called Little St. James. Epstein referred to her as his best friend, and she seemed to organize much of his daily life. Through Epstein, Ghislaine became connected to many powerful people in politics, business, and royalty. She was known for her friendship with Prince Andrew, who was then a member of the British royal family. She introduced Epstein to the prince, and the three often spent time together. She also became friends with figures like Bill Clinton and Donald Trump, though those friendships were tied to her place in high society. In 1996, she made news in London when she was arrested for drink driving. The newspapers listed her job as internet operator. By then she had already built a life in New York and was moving in elite circles. She remained close to Epstein, and together they maintained a wide social network that included some of the most powerful people in the world. After Ghislaine Maxwell moved to New York and became close to Jeffrey Epstein, she began taking part in a pattern of behavior that would later be described in court as sex trafficking and abuse of underage girls. She did not act alone. Epstein was the central figure, but Maxwell played a key role in finding girls, gaining their trust, and preparing them for sexual abuse. The method started with recruitment. Maxwell would look for girls who were young and often in difficult situations. Some came from broken homes. Some had money problems. Some were simply looking for opportunities or guidance. One of the ways she found girls was by being friendly with them and offering help. She would present herself as a caring woman who wanted to mentor them or offer them a chance to meet successful people. One example of how the recruitment worked happened in Palm Beach, Florida. In 1999, a girl named Virginia, who was 16 years old, worked as a spa attendant at a private club called Mar-a-Lago. Maxwell met her there. Maxwell was friendly and asked about her life. She offered Virginia the chance to give massages to Epstein. Virginia later said that Maxwell acted as if she was opening a door to a better life. After meeting a girl, Maxwell would begin what prosecutors later called the grooming process. She would spend time with the girl, ask about her life, and make her feel special. She would take the girl shopping, give her money, or offer gifts. The goal was to build trust and make the girl feel that Maxwell was a friend and protector. Once trust was established, the girl was brought into Epstein's world. Maxwell would explain what was expected. In some cases, she gave direct instructions on how to give massages that involved sexual contact. She told one girl that she needed to learn how to give Epstein what he wanted. She gave step-by-step lessons, including how to perform oral sex. She told the girls to be quiet and to be subservient. The girls were often taken to Epstein's homes. These included his mansion in New York City, his estate in Palm Beach, his ranch in New Mexico, and his private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands called Little St. James. Maxwell arranged travel. As a qualified helicopter pilot, she sometimes flew Epstein and the girls to the island. The abuse did not happen only with Epstein. In some cases, Maxwell participated. One girl later stated that in 1996, when she was working for Maxwell and Epstein on an art project at a billionaire's home in Ohio, Maxwell touched her in a sexual way. The same girl said Epstein also assaulted her there. Another girl, who was 15 at the time, was flown to Epstein's New Mexico property where Maxwell and Epstein molested her on a massage table. Maxwell also recruited girls to bring other girls. She and Epstein set up what one witness called a pyramid scheme. A girl who brought another girl to them would receive money or rewards. This expanded the circle of victims. Over time, multiple girls were brought into the same pattern of trust, grooming, and abuse. One victim, identified in court as Jane, was recruited in 1994 when she was 14 years old. She was a student at a summer arts camp. Maxwell approached her, showed interest in her, and eventually took her to Epstein's home. There she was told to give massages that turned sexual. The abuse continued over several years. Another victim, who later used her real name in court, was Annie Farmer. In 1996, she was 15 years old. Maxwell invited her to Epstein's ranch in New Mexico. While there, Maxwell and Epstein molested her on a massage table. Annie later said that Maxwell acted as an active participant, not just a recruiter. Maxwell used her position as Epstein's companion and manager to control the situation. She hired and fired staff at his homes. She supervised the daily operations. She made sure the girls were available when Epstein wanted them. She also worked to keep the girls from speaking out. She threatened some of them. One victim said Maxwell threatened to harm her career or her physical safety if she did not comply or if she talked to anyone. The crimes took place over many years. The pattern started in the mid-1990s and continued into the early 2000s. In 2001, a girl named Carolyn was brought into the scheme. She was 14 years old. Maxwell was involved in arranging for her to give sexual massages to Epstein. Prosecutors later used the fact that a massage table used in those acts was made in another state to show that the crimes crossed state lines. Maxwell did not just recruit young girls. She also worked to protect Epstein from consequences. When questions were raised, she denied everything. She remained close to Epstein even after he was arrested in 2006 and 2008 for soliciting a minor for prostitution. During those years, she continued to manage aspects of his life, though they were seen together less often in public. The victims were not all strangers to each other. Some met through Maxwell and Epstein. Some knew they were not the only ones. Yet the fear of Maxwell's threats and the power Epstein held kept many silent for years. Maxwell used her social status, her connections, and her wealth to create an environment where the abuse could happen without interruption. The methods Maxwell used were consistent. She targeted girls who were vulnerable. She befriended them and gained their trust. She trained them for sexual acts. She arranged travel and access to Epstein's properties. She sometimes took part in the abuse herself. She threatened victims to keep them quiet. She managed the staff and the daily routines that allowed the crimes to continue. By the time Epstein was arrested again in July 2019 on federal sex trafficking charges, Maxwell had already faced civil lawsuits from some of the victims. In 2015, Virginia Giuffre had sued Maxwell for defamation after Maxwell called her a liar. That case was settled in 2017 with Maxwell paying millions of dollars. In 2017, another woman named Sarah Ransom sued Epstein and Maxwell, saying Maxwell had hired her for massages and then threatened her. That case settled in 2018. In 2019, after Epstein's arrest, more victims came forward with detailed accounts of what Maxwell had done. The crimes Maxwell committed were not a one-time event. They were a pattern that stretched over at least a decade. She used her relationship with Epstein to gain access to young girls. She used her social skills to recruit them. She used threats to control them. And she used her position in Epstein's household to make sure the abuse could continue without interruption. For many years, the crimes that Ghislaine Maxwell took part in remained hidden. The victims were young and afraid. Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein had money, lawyers, and powerful friends. When victims tried to speak, they were threatened or dismissed. But in the mid-2000s, law enforcement in Florida began looking into Epstein. In 2008, he pleaded guilty to state charges of soliciting a minor for prostitution and served a short sentence. At that time, Maxwell was not charged. The turning point came in 2018. The Miami Herald newspaper published a series of investigative articles written by a reporter named Julie K. Brown. The articles showed that Epstein had abused many underage girls over many years. They also named Maxwell as a key person who helped recruit the girls. The articles brought public attention to the case and put pressure on law enforcement to take action. After the Miami Herald articles, more victims came forward. Some filed civil lawsuits against Maxwell. In 2015, Virginia Giuffre had already sued Maxwell for defamation. That case settled in 2017. But in 2019, after Epstein was arrested again on federal sex trafficking charges, new civil cases were filed. Victims like Annie Farmer and Maria Farmer gave sworn statements about what Maxwell had done to them. These statements became part of the public record. On July 6, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was arrested by the FBI. He was charged with sex trafficking and conspiracy. On August 10, 2019, Epstein was found dead in his jail cell in Manhattan. The medical examiner ruled his death a suicide. After his death, the investigation did not stop. Federal prosecutors in the Southern District of New York continued to look into other people who had helped Epstein commit his crimes. Maxwell was now a target of the investigation, but she went into hiding. She stopped attending public events. She moved from place to place. For months, law enforcement could not find her. She used phones that were hard to trace. She stayed at properties that were not in her name. In late 2019, she moved to a large property in Bradford, New Hampshire, a small town in the northeastern United States. She used former British military personnel as security guards. The FBI tracked her down using a mobile phone tracking device. They found a phone she was using to contact her husband, her sister, and one of her lawyers. On July 2, 2020, agents went to the property in Bradford, New Hampshire, and arrested Maxwell. She was taken into federal custody. The next day, federal prosecutors in New York unsealed an indictment against her. The indictment charged her with 6 federal crimes: enticement of minors, sex trafficking of children, and perjury. The charges covered acts that took place between 1994 and 1997. Prosecutors said she had helped recruit and prepare underage girls for Epstein to abuse. They also said she had lied under oath during a civil lawsuit in 2015. Maxwell appeared in court in Manhattan on July 14, 2020. She pleaded not guilty. The judge ordered her held without bail. Prosecutors argued she was a flight risk. They pointed out that she had 3 citizenships, British, French, and American, and that France does not extradite its citizens. They also said she had hidden from law enforcement for months and had access to large amounts of money. The judge agreed and denied bail. Maxwell's lawyers made several more requests for bail over the following months, but all were denied. In March 2021, prosecutors added new charges. They said Maxwell had also been involved with a 4th girl, a 14-year-old, between 2001 and 2004. The new charges included sex trafficking of a minor and sex trafficking conspiracy. Maxwell again pleaded not guilty. The trial on the sex trafficking charges began on November 29, 2021, in federal court in Manhattan. Judge Allison Nathan presided. The trial lasted about 1 month. Prosecutors called witnesses, including 4 victims. 3 of them used only first names or pseudonyms in court to protect their privacy. One victim, Annie Farmer, chose to use her real name. She testified about what Maxwell had done to her when she was 15 years old. Other witnesses included people who had worked for Epstein. Juan Alessi, Epstein's former concierge in Palm Beach, gave testimony about how Maxwell ran the household and brought young girls to the property. The prosecutors also presented physical evidence, including a massage table that was used in Epstein's Florida home. They argued that the table was made in another state, which showed the crimes involved interstate commerce. Maxwell did not testify in her own defense. Her lawyers called a psychology expert to speak about false memories, trying to cast doubt on the victims' accounts. The defense argued that the victims were motivated by money from civil lawsuits and that their memories were unreliable. On December 29, 2021, the jury returned its verdict. Maxwell was found guilty on 5 of the 6 counts. The counts included sex trafficking of a minor, transporting a minor with intent to engage in criminal sexual activity, and 3 counts of conspiracy. She was found not guilty on 1 count of enticing a minor to travel for illegal sex acts. The charges carried a potential sentence of up to 65 years in prison. After the verdict, Maxwell's lawyers asked for a new trial. They said one of the jurors had failed to disclose during jury selection that he had been sexually abused as a child. They argued that this affected the fairness of the trial. The judge reviewed the matter and on April 1, 2022, denied the request for a new trial. She ruled that the juror had not intentionally lied and that his experience did not make the trial unfair. On June 28, 2022, Judge Nathan sentenced Maxwell to 20 years in federal prison. Prosecutors had asked for at least 30 years. The judge said in her sentencing statement that Maxwell had been instrumental in the abuse of several underage girls, and that she herself had participated in some of the abuse. The judge also said Maxwell was not being punished as a substitute for Epstein, but for her own role in the crimes. Before the sentencing, Maxwell was placed on suicide watch for a short time after she complained of threats from prison staff. Her lawyers asked for a delay in sentencing, but the judge denied the request. Maxwell was sent to the Federal Correction Institution in Tallahassee, Florida, a low-security prison for women. In July 2022, Maxwell filed an appeal of her conviction. On September 17, 2024, the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit upheld her conviction and sentence. In April 2025, her lawyers asked the Supreme Court to hear her appeal. On October 6, 2025, the Supreme Court declined to hear the case, meaning her conviction remained final. While the sex trafficking case was ongoing, Maxwell also faced 2 perjury counts for lying in the 2015 civil lawsuit. After she was convicted on the sex trafficking charges, prosecutors decided not to go forward with the perjury trial. In July 2025, after Maxwell had been in prison for several years, the U.S. House Committee on Oversight and Accountability issued a subpoena for her to testify about her involvement with Epstein. Maxwell's lawyer responded by asking for immunity from further prosecution. The committee did not grant immunity. In November 2025, the committee chairman said Maxwell would refuse to answer questions if forced to testify. In February 2026, Maxwell appeared virtually from prison before the committee, but invoked her Fifth Amendment right not to answer questions. In August 2025, Maxwell was transferred from the prison in Florida to a minimum security federal prison camp in Bryan, Texas. The Bureau of Prisons said the transfer was routine. Some members of Congress questioned whether she was receiving special treatment, and an investigation was opened into the matter. The victims of Maxwell's crimes continued to speak out after the trial. Annie Farmer said after the verdict that she hoped it would bring solace to all who needed it and show that even people with great power and privilege would be held accountable. Virginia Giuffre, who had first accused Maxwell in 2015, continued to advocate for survivors of abuse. Maxwell remains in federal custody. Her projected release date is July 17, 2037. The long pattern of recruitment, grooming, and abuse that Ghislaine Maxwell carried out alongside Jeffrey Epstein was finally brought to light through investigative journalism, the courage of the victims who came forward, and a federal prosecution that held her accountable for her role in the crimes. Story 3. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev was born on July 22, 1993. His father, Anzur Tsarnaev, was Chechen. His mother, Zabaydat Tsarneva, was Avar. The family's roots were in Chechnya, but years before Dzhokhar was born, the family had been moved by the Soviet Union to Kyrgyzstan. Dzhokhar had an older brother named Tamerlan, who was born in 1986, and he also had 2 sisters. In the late 1980s, his parents moved across Central Asia, and they were married in 1986. Dzhokhar spent his first years in Kyrgyzstan. In 2001, the family moved to Makhachkala, which is in Dagestan, part of Russia. Then in April 2002, Dzhokhar and his parents traveled to the United States on a tourist visa. They settled in Cambridge, Massachusetts. His father applied for asylum because he said they would face danger due to their ties to Chechnya. The application was accepted. Dzhokhar's older brother Tamerlan stayed with an uncle for about 2 years before he also came to the United States. The family filed for asylum for the children, and they received derivative asylum status. They lived on Norfolk Street in Cambridge. For the next several years, the family moved often. Jakar's father worked as a backyard mechanic, and his mother worked as a cosmetologist until she lost her job because she would not work in a place that served men. Both parents received welfare benefits at times. Jakar went to Cambridgeport Elementary School and then Cambridge Community Charter School for middle school. He attended Cambridge Ringe and Latin School, a public high school. In high school, he was a wrestler and became a Greater Boston League Winter All-Star. He graduated in 2011, and the city of Cambridge gave him a $2,500 scholarship. A neighbor described him as a lovely kid who seemed grateful to be in the United States. People who knew him in Cambridge called him Jahar and remembered him as a gentle, friendly boy. One boxing coach said he was like a puppy dog following his older brother. In March 2007, the family was granted legal permanent residence. Jakar later became a United States citizen while he was in college. In 2011, Jakar reached out to a professor at the University of Massachusetts Dartmouth who taught about Chechen history, saying he was interested in the topic. That same year he enrolled at the university. He lived in a dorm called Pinedale Hall. His college years were mixed. Some students thought he was normal and popular, others found him creepy. He sometimes smoked marijuana and also sold it. He liked hip-hop music and did not talk much about politics. Many friends found it hard to imagine he could ever be involved in violence. He spoke American English without a foreign accent and seemed fully part of the local community. On a Russian-language social networking site, he listed his worldview as Islam and his priorities as career and money. He posted links to Islamic websites and videos about fighters in Syria. But on Twitter, he mostly posted about sports and food. His grades in college began to drop. Over 3 semesters, he received 7 failing grades, and his grade point average was 1.09. He changed majors several times and owed the university $20,000 in unpaid bills. At the time, he was registered as an arts and literature student with no declared major. He continued to live in his dorm and spent time with friends. In early 2013, Jakar Tsarnaev and his older brother Tamerlan began planning an attack. They decided to set off bombs near the finish line of the Boston Marathon, which was held every year on Patriots' Day. The brothers built 2 bombs using pressure cookers. They put explosive material inside the cookers and added shrapnel such as nails and ball bearings to cause more harm. Each bomb was placed inside a backpack. On April 15, 2013, the Boston Marathon was taking place. Thousands of people were gathered along the route. In the afternoon, the brothers each carried a backpack containing a bomb. They walked to Boylston Street near the finish line. Jakar placed his backpack on the ground near a crowd of spectators. Tamerlan placed his backpack farther down the street, outside a restaurant called the Forum. The brothers then moved away from the area. At 2:49 p.m., the 2 bombs exploded within seconds of each other. The blasts killed 3 people. The first person killed was Crystal Campbell, a 29-year-old woman who had gone to watch the marathon. The second was Lingzi Liu, a 23-year-old graduate student from China. The third was Martin Richard, an 8-year-old boy who was standing with his family. Hundreds of other people were injured. Many lost arms or legs. The explosions sent debris into the crowd, and the scene was chaotic. After the bombing, Jakar returned to his dormitory at the University of Massachusetts Dartmouth. He stayed there for several days. He went to the campus gym and spent time with friends. Some friends later said he seemed relaxed. During this time, he continued to use social media. He sent a tweet that told people in Boston to stay safe. The FBI began reviewing surveillance footage from the marathon and identified 2 men who had placed backpacks at the bombing sites. The men were Jakar and Tamerlan. On April 18, 2013, at 5 p.m., the FBI released photographs of the 2 suspects and asked the public to help identify them. Within hours, the brothers realized their images had been made public. That evening they went to their family's apartment in Cambridge. There they gathered 5 improvised explosive devices, ammunition, a semi-automatic handgun, and a machete. They then drove toward the Massachusetts Institute of Technology campus. At about 10:25 p.m., the brothers saw a police cruiser driven by MIT police officer Sean Collier. Officer Collier was sitting in his vehicle. The brothers approached and shot him 6 times. He died from his wounds. The shooting happened because the brothers tried to take his gun, but they failed to get it. After killing Officer Collier, the brothers fled in a car. They drove to Allston, a neighborhood in Boston. There they found an SUV and carjacked it. They forced the driver, a man named Dun Meng, to drive them around. During the carjacking, they told him they were the marathon bombers. They took his money and his ATM card. While they stopped to get gas at a cash-only station, Dun Meng escaped and ran to another gas station to call the police. The police were then able to track the SUV using Dun Meng's cell phone and a tracking device in the vehicle. In the early hours of April 19th, police found the brothers in Watertown, Massachusetts. A shootout started. The brothers threw explosives at the police officers. Both brothers were shot. Tamerlan was wounded several times. Jakar got into the stolen SUV and drove directly toward the officers who were arresting his brother. He ran over Tamerlan, dragging him under the vehicle. Tamerlan was later pronounced dead at a hospital from gunshot wounds and the blunt force injuries from being dragged. Jakar drove away but abandoned the SUV about half a mile later and ran off on foot. During this escape, a transit police officer was critically injured. Thousands of police officers searched Watertown while the Boston area was locked down. People were told to stay inside their homes. The search went on for most of the day. After the shootout in Watertown, Jakar Tsarnaev escaped on foot. A massive manhunt began. Thousands of police officers from local towns, state police, the FBI, and SWAT teams searched the area. Residents of Watertown and nearby neighborhoods were ordered to stay inside their homes. The Boston metropolitan area was effectively shut down all day on April 19, 2013. That evening, a resident named David Henberry went outside after the shelter-in-place order was lifted. He noticed that the cover on his boat, which was stored in his backyard, had come loose. When he lifted the tarpaulin, he saw a man lying inside, covered in blood. Henberry retreated and called 911. Police responded quickly. A state police helicopter used thermal imaging to confirm someone was inside the boat. After officers saw movement under the tarp, they began firing, but the superintendent on scene ordered them to stop. Tsarnaev was unarmed when he was taken into custody. SWAT officers pulled him from the boat and handcuffed him. He was bleeding from wounds to his left ear, neck, and thigh. He was taken to Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston, where he was treated in the intensive care unit. While Tsarnaev was in the hospital, he could not speak because of a tracheostomy. A federal interrogation team questioned him, and he wrote his answers in a notebook. He was not read his Miranda rights at the start of the questioning, under a public safety exception. During these initial interrogations, he admitted his role in the Boston Marathon bombing. He said he and his brother were motivated by extremist Islamic beliefs and by the U.S. wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. He also told investigators that they had planned to drive to New York City and detonate explosives in Times Square, but that plan fell apart when they ran low on gas during the carjacking, and the carjacking victim escaped. After he was read his Miranda rights by a federal judge at his hospital bedside on April 22nd, Tsarnaev stopped cooperating with investigators. On April 22, 2013, Tsarnaev was charged in a criminal complaint with using and conspiring to use a weapon of mass destruction resulting in death, and with malicious destruction of property resulting in death. In June 2013, a federal grand jury indicted him on 30 charges, some of which made him eligible for the death penalty. He was also charged by Middlesex County prosecutors for the murder of MIT police officer Sean Collier. Tsarnaev made his first public court appearance on July 10, 2013, in federal court in Boston. He pleaded not guilty to all 30 counts. In January 2014, U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder announced that the federal government would seek the death penalty. The trial began on January 5, 2015 in Boston. Judge George O'Toole presided. Tsarnaev's defense attorney, Judy Clark, admitted in her opening statement that Tsarnaev had committed the acts, but she argued that his older brother Tamerlan had manipulated and influenced him. The defense tried to show that Tamerlan was the driving force behind the attacks. On April 8, 2015, the jury found Tsarnaev guilty on all 30 counts. The same jury then moved to the sentencing phase. During that phase, victims and family members testified about the harm they had suffered. The parents of Martin Richard, the 8-year-old boy killed in the bombing, wrote a letter asking that Tsarnaev be sentenced to life in prison instead of death, because they did not want to go through years of appeals. On May 15, 2015, the jury sentenced Tsarnaev to death by lethal injection on 6 of the 17 capital counts. On June 24, 2015, at his formal sentencing, Tsarnaev spoke for the first time in court. He apologized to the victims and admitted he had carried out the bombings with his brother. After his sentencing, Tsarnaev was moved from the medical facility in Massachusetts to a federal prison in Colorado. He was eventually placed in the ADX Florence Supermax facility, which holds inmates with high security needs. While male federal death row inmates are normally housed in Terre Haute, Indiana, the Bureau of Prisons placed Tsarnaev in Colorado due to unique security management requirements. Tsarnaev appealed his conviction and death sentence. In July 2020, a federal appeals court overturned the death sentence, ruling that the trial judge had not adequately questioned potential jurors about their exposure to pretrial publicity. The court ordered a new penalty phase trial. The government appealed that decision to the U.S. Supreme Court. In March 2022, the Supreme Court reversed the appeals court and reinstated the death sentence. The court ruled that Tsarnaev had received a fair trial. Further appeals continued over claims of juror bias. As of 2025, Tsarnaev remains on death row at ADX Florence. For the hundreds of people injured in the bombing, and for the families of those killed, the legal proceedings stretched on for years, but the core facts of what happened on April 15, 2013, and the days that followed never changed. The story of the Boston Marathon bombing ended for the victims in loss and pain, and for Dzhokhar Tsarnaev it ended with a death sentence that, after more than a decade of appeals, still stood. Story 4. Christopher Michael Benoit was born on May 21, 1967, in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. He was the second of 3 sons born to Michael Benoit, who worked as a paramedic, and Margaret Benoit. The family lived in Edmonton, Alberta, for much of Chris's childhood. His parents divorced when he was young, and he remained close to his father. From an early age, Chris showed a strong interest in professional wrestling. He watched matches on television and admired wrestlers like the Dynamite Kid. When he was a teenager, he began training to become a wrestler himself. His first formal training came under the guidance of Stu Hart, a famous wrestling trainer in Calgary, Alberta. Chris moved to Calgary in his late teens to live in the Hart family's house, known as the Dungeon, where he learned the technical skills of wrestling. He worked hard and was known for being very dedicated. Chris started his professional wrestling career in the late 1980s. He wrestled for small promotions in Canada and Japan. In Japan, he became popular because of his intense style and technical skill. He earned the nickname the Pegasus Kid. His reputation grew as a wrestler who gave everything in the ring. In the early 1990s, Chris joined Extreme Championship Wrestling, ECW, in the United States. There he became known for his hard-hitting matches. In 1995, he signed with World Championship Wrestling, WCW, a larger wrestling company. During his time in WCW, he won several championships and became a well-known performer. In 2000, he left WCW and joined the World Wrestling Federation, WWF, which later became World Wrestling Entertainment, WWE. In WWE, he continued to rise in fame and won the World Heavyweight Championship in 2004 at WrestleMania XX, one of the biggest events in wrestling. Chris married his first wife, Martina, in the early 1990s. They had 2 children, a daughter named Megan and a son named David. The family lived in Canada for many years. Chris's wrestling career kept him traveling often, and the marriage eventually ended in divorce. In 1998, while still in WCW, Chris began a relationship with Nancy Toffoloni. Nancy was a wrestling valet who had previously been married to wrestler Kevin Sullivan. Chris and Nancy moved in together, and they married on November 23, 2000. They had 1 son, Daniel, born on February 25, 2000. The family settled in a suburb of Atlanta, Georgia, in a house outside the city. People who knew Chris described him as quiet, serious, and very focused on his wrestling career. He was known to train constantly and rarely took time off. Friends and co-workers said he was polite and kept to himself. Some noticed that he did not socialize much outside of wrestling. A few people later said he had a dark sense of humor and sometimes seemed sad or distant. In May 2003, Nancy filed for divorce from Chris. In the filing, she claimed that Chris had been physically abusive during their marriage. 3 months later, she withdrew the divorce request, and the couple remained together. The details of that filing were not widely known at the time. Chris's wrestling career required him to take many blows to the head. Over the years, he suffered multiple concussions. Some of his co-workers later said that he would often wrestle even when he was hurt. He also used painkillers and other medications to manage injuries. In the mid-2000s, he was among several wrestlers whose names appeared in investigations about steroid prescriptions from doctors. One of Chris and Nancy's close friends was wrestler Mike Durham, known as Johnny Grunge. Durham died in February 2006 from heart failure. After his death, people close to the couple noticed that Chris and Nancy became more private. They moved to a different house and stopped spending time with many of their former friends. Chris continued to wrestle full-time for WWE through 2006 and into 2007. He was scheduled for a major match at a WWE event in late June 2007. In the weeks before that, his father later said Chris had seemed tired and had mentioned wanting to retire soon. On Friday, June 22, 2007, Chris Benoit was at home with his wife Nancy and their 7-year-old son Daniel in Fayetteville, Georgia. That evening, Chris killed Nancy in the bonus room of the house. He bound her arms with coaxial cables and taped her feet together with duct tape. He also placed a makeshift gag made from a tube sock and tape in her mouth. This gag was later found in the kitchen trash with dried blood on it. Chris then pressed his knee into Nancy's back while pulling a cord around her neck, causing death by strangulation. After she died, he wrapped her body in a blanket and placed a Bible next to her. Toxicology tests later showed that Nancy had alcohol, hydrocodone, and Xanax in her system, but the levels were considered normal for therapeutic use. The medical examiner did not find evidence that she had been sedated before she was killed. On Saturday, June 23rd, Chris killed Daniel in the boy's bedroom. He first gave Daniel Xanax, a sedative, so that the child was unconscious. Then he suffocated Daniel. The boy had internal injuries to his throat area, but no bruises. Chris placed another Bible next to Daniel's body. The exact time of death was not determined, but the condition of the body later showed that Daniel died after Nancy. After killing Nancy on Friday night and Daniel on Saturday morning, Chris remained in the house. He began making phone calls to co-workers in the wrestling company. On Saturday afternoon at about 3:30 p.m., fellow wrestler Chavo Guerrero received a voicemail from Chris's phone. In the message, Chris said that Nancy and Daniel had food poisoning and that he would be late for a wrestling event that night in Beaumont, Texas. Guerrero called Chris back. Chris answered and sounded tired and groggy. He repeated the story about food poisoning. 12 minutes later, Guerrero called again and left a voicemail. Chris called him back at 3:44 p.m., saying he had been on the phone with Delta Airlines to change his flight. He told Guerrero that he had had a stressful day because of Nancy and Daniel being sick. At the end of the call, Chris said, "Chavo, I love you." Guerrero later said Chris sounded off when he said it. Another co-worker who often traveled with Chris called him from the airport in Houston. Chris answered and told this co-worker that Nancy was vomiting blood and that Daniel was also vomiting. Chris did not show up for the wrestling event that night. He left another voicemail for Guerrero saying he would be on a flight arriving in Houston at 8 a.m. the next morning. On Sunday, June 24th, between 3:51 a.m. and 3:58 a.m., 5 text messages were sent from Chris's and Nancy's cell phones to co-workers. 4 of the texts displayed the Benoit home address. The 5th text said that the family's dogs were in an enclosed pool area and that a side door of the garage had been left open. 2 of the recipients were Chavo Guerrero and a WWE referee named Scott Armstrong. Guerrero woke up when the text came in but went back to sleep, thinking he would ask Chris about it later. Chris did not board the flight to Houston that was scheduled to arrive at 8 a.m. Later that morning, Chris called the WWE Talent Relations office. He told the person who answered that Daniel was vomiting and that he and Nancy were at the hospital with him. He said he would take a later flight to Houston so he could still compete at a pay-per-view event that night where he was scheduled to wrestle for a championship. He did not show up for that event. On the evening of Sunday, June 24th, Chris went to his weight room. He removed the bar from a lat pull-down machine, a piece of exercise equipment. He took the cord from the machine and fashioned one end into a noose. He attached the noose around his neck and then released the weights, which pulled the cord tight and caused his death by hanging. He was found hanging from the pulley cable. Near his body, there was also a Bible. The bodies remained in the house undiscovered through the weekend. On Monday, June 25th, wrestlers and company executives arrived in Corpus Christi, Texas, for a Monday night wrestling show. By the afternoon, they had not heard from Chris in more than 24 hours. Guerrero showed a WWE executive the text messages he and Armstrong had received from Chris's and Nancy's phones. The company then called the police in Fayetteville, Georgia, and asked them to go to the Benoit house to check on the family. The police arrived and found the 3 bodies. They informed WWE of the discovery at around 4:15 p.m. Central Time. The house was declared a major crime scene. When the Fayetteville police entered the Benoit home on Monday, June 25th, 2007, they found the 3 bodies in different parts of the house. Nancy's body was in the bonus room, wrapped in a blanket with a Bible nearby. Daniel's body was in his bedroom, with a Bible placed beside him. Chris's body was found hanging in the weight room. Police secured the scene immediately. The house was treated as a major crime scene while investigators began their work. The Fayette County Sheriff's Office and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation took over the case. They conducted a thorough search of the house. They collected physical evidence, including the cables used to bind Nancy, the gag from the kitchen trash, and the cord from the lat pull-down machine used in Chris's death. They also seized computers, cell phones, and medical records from the home. On June 26, 2007, law enforcement officials held a press conference to release preliminary information. They confirmed that the deaths were being investigated as a murder-suicide. They stated that Nancy and Daniel had been killed before Chris took his own life. They also said that steroids were found in the home and that investigators were looking into whether drugs played a role. Autopsies were performed by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's Medical Examiner's Office. The results were released to the public on July 17, 2007. Nancy's cause of death was listed as asphyxiation due to strangulation. Her limbs had been bound, and there was evidence that a gag had been used. Toxicology tests showed she had hydrocodone, hydromorphone, Xanax, and alcohol in her system, but the levels were within what doctors consider normal for therapeutic treatment. The medical examiner stated that she was not sedated before she was killed. Daniel's cause of death was listed as asphyxiation due to suffocation. Toxicology tests showed Xanax in his system. The medical examiner determined that he had been sedated before he was killed and that he did not die from a drug overdose. The internal injuries to his throat area were consistent with suffocation. Chris's cause of death was listed as suicide by hanging. Toxicology tests showed Xanax and hydrocodone in his system at levels consistent with therapeutic use. His urine tested positive for elevated levels of testosterone cypionate, a synthetic anabolic steroid, which investigators believed had been taken recently. He tested negative for blood alcohol. During the investigation, detectives examined Chris's computer. They looked at his internet search history from the weekend of the murders. The police report stated that the only topic he searched during that time was the biblical prophet Elijah, who in the Bible resurrected a dead child. Years later, Nancy's sister claimed that Chris had also searched for information on how to break a neck, but that claim was not found in the police report, and Chris's autopsy showed no damage to his neck bones or throat structure beyond what resulted from the hanging. No suicide note was found during the initial investigation. Months later, when Chris's belongings were sent to his first wife and their 2 children in Canada, a Bible was found among those possessions. Inside that Bible was a handwritten notation from Chris that said, "I'm preparing to leave this earth." His father Michael Benoit confirmed this to the media. The investigation also looked into the steroid prescriptions Chris had received. His personal physician, Dr. Phil Aston, had a medical practice in Carrollton, Georgia. Federal authorities raided Aston's office after the murders. They seized patient records, including those of several other wrestlers. In February 2008, Dr. Aston was charged with illegally prescribing medications. On January 29, 2009, Aston pleaded guilty to 175 counts of illegally distributing prescription drugs. He admitted that he had prescribed drugs without properly examining patients. He was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. The Fayette County District Attorney's Office closed the investigation after determining that Chris had acted alone and that no other individuals were involved in the deaths. Because Chris was deceased, no criminal charges were filed. Chris's brain was examined by neurosurgeons after his death. His father agreed to have the brain studied to determine whether repeated head injuries had caused damage. On September 5, 2007, Julian Bales, a neurosurgeon from West Virginia University, held a press conference in New York City to announce the results. The examination showed that Chris's brain had severe chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a condition caused by repeated concussions. The damage was found in all 4 lobes of the brain and the brain stem. The researchers stated that his brain resembled that of an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient. They concluded that repeated head trauma during his wrestling career had caused this condition. Nancy's family held a memorial for her and Daniel on July 14, 2007, in Daytona Beach, Florida. Nancy and Daniel were cremated. Their ashes were placed in starfish-shaped urns that were kept by Nancy's family. Chris was cremated after a private memorial service in Ardrossan, Alberta, on August 6, 2007. The location of his ashes was not made public. After the full details of the murders became known, World Wrestling Entertainment removed all mentions of Chris Benoit from its website and future programming. The tribute show that had aired on Monday Night Raw on June 25th was never rebroadcast. The company removed his name from championship histories and edited him out of archival footage whenever possible. Benoit's likeness and name were removed from video games, DVDs, and other merchandise. The company stated that it wanted to honor the victims, Nancy and Daniel, and did not want to glorify someone who had committed such acts. In the years that followed, researchers continued to study chronic traumatic encephalopathy in athletes. The findings from Chris Benoit's brain became part of a larger discussion about head injuries in professional wrestling and other contact sports. In 2013, a group of more than 60 former wrestlers filed a lawsuit against WWE, claiming the company had concealed the risks of head injuries. That lawsuit was dismissed in 2018. Nancy's family spoke publicly in later years about the tragedy. They expressed their love for Nancy and Daniel and their grief over what happened. Sandra Toffaloni, Nancy's sister, stated that she believed Chris's brain damage had caused him to act in ways he would not have otherwise. She also confirmed that Daniel did not have any genetic disorder, contrary to some rumors that had circulated after the deaths. Chris's eldest son, David, who was living in Canada at the time of the murders, later spoke about his father. He said that in their last conversations before June 2007, Chris had shown no signs of what he was planning. David stated that Chris had arranged for him to visit the weekend after the murders. He also said that his father did not leave a suicide note addressed to him or his sister. The investigation concluded with no further legal actions against anyone other than Dr. Aston. The case remains closed. After the deaths, Nancy and Daniel Benoit were remembered by their family as victims of a tragedy. Their remains were kept by Nancy's relatives, who have spoken publicly to honor their memory. The criminal case ended with Chris Benoit's death, and no trial was held. The medical findings about his brain condition became a key piece of evidence in later research on sports-related head injuries, but they did not change the legal conclusion that he alone was responsible for the murders of his wife and child. Story 5. Colton Harris Moore was born on March 22, 1991, in Mount Vernon, Washington. His mother was Pamela Kohler, and his father was Gordon Moore. Colton grew up in his mother's house on Camano Island, a small island in the state of Washington. The family did not have an easy life. His father used drugs and was in prison while Colton was still a toddler. When Colton was about 7 years old, his stepfather died. His mother later said that even in first grade she felt there was something different about Colton, a kind of disconnection from other people. The neighbors on Camano Island noticed problems in the home. They made several calls to Child Protective Services because they believed Colton was being neglected or abused. At school, Colton did not listen to his teachers. He started fights and sometimes broke things around the house. His mother said that when she drank alcohol, she became mean and would break his possessions. Colton started spending time in the woods at a very young age. When he was 7, he would break into vacation homes in the area. He stole blankets, food, and water, then disappeared into the forest for days at a time. When Colton was 12, his father got out of prison. Not long after, Gordon Moore got into an argument at a family barbecue. He walked into the woods, was arrested, and then was never heard from again. Around that same age, Colton received his first conviction for stolen property. By the time he was 13, he had 3 more convictions. Each time, he was given a short stay of 10 days in a detention center or community service. Doctors later diagnosed him with depression, attention deficit disorder, and intermittent explosive disorder. In 2003, when Colton was 12, police found a neighbor's camcorder in his home. This time the court gave him a 3-year juvenile sentence because he had been in trouble before. He was sent to Green Hill School in Chehalis, Washington. Later, he was transferred to a halfway house in Renton. In April 2008, Colton walked out of the halfway house and did not return. After Colton walked out of the halfway house in April 2008, he did not return to a normal life. Instead, he began living in the woods and breaking into homes and businesses on Camano Island and surrounding areas. He did not take expensive items at first. He would go into a home to take a hot bath or steal ice cream from the freezer. He took only what he needed to survive in the forest. Over time, his thefts became larger. He started stealing bicycles, then cars, then boats. He also began stealing small airplanes. He had no formal flight training. Instead, he learned by reading aircraft manuals and handbooks. He watched a DVD titled, How to Fly a Small Airplane. He also practiced on flight simulator computer games. In November 2008, he stole a Cessna 182 airplane that belonged to a radio personality named Bob Rivers. The plane was valued at over $150,000. Colton flew it, but later crashed in the Yakama Indian Reservation. The plane was badly damaged, but he survived and walked away from the crash. After that crash, he kept stealing. In 2009, he broke into a home and used the homeowner's computer and credit card to order bear mace and a pair of night vision goggles that cost $6,500. He continued to move between Washington, Idaho, and Canada. Police believed he was responsible for around 100 thefts in that region. He often left footprints behind. In some places, police found footprints from bare feet. That is how he later became known by a nickname, though officials noted that he wore shoes more often than not. In February 2010, police in the San Juan Islands found cartoonish chalk outlines of feet drawn on the floor of a grocery store that had been broken into. In the fall of 2009, police found footprints at an airport hangar in Bonners Ferry, Idaho. Around that time, a Cessna 182 was stolen from that airport. The plane crash-landed about 260 miles away near Granite Falls, Washington. The pilot had tried several times to land at the small airport there before the crash. The pilot was gone by the time police arrived. In the spring of 2010, Colton began moving east. He was suspected of stealing vehicles across several states. In late June, a white Toyota Sequoia was found abandoned in Norfolk, Nebraska. That SUV had been reported stolen in Yankton, South Dakota. On the same day the SUV was found, several burglaries were reported at Carl Stephan Memorial Airport, which was only 1 mile away. Not long after, a truck owned by the town of Ottumwa, Iowa, was stolen. That truck was later found in Dallas City, Illinois. On May 30th, 2010, police in Raymond, Washington, found a handwritten note and $100 inside a veterinary clinic. The note said that the person drove by, had extra cash, and wanted the money used for the care of animals. The note was signed with the name Colton Harrismore and the nickname he had been given. On July 4th, 2010, a Cessna 400 single-engine plane was reported stolen from the airport in Bloomington, Indiana. The plane was later found crashed in the shoreline waters of Great Abaco Island in the Bahamas. Shortly after the plane was found, there were several break-ins reported on the island. Investigators believed the same person was responsible. By this time, law enforcement in different states had begun connecting the thefts. A federal judge in the U.S. District Court of Western Washington had issued an indictment in December 2009, but it was not released publicly until July 6, 2010. That indictment charged Colton with interstate transport of stolen property related to the plane stolen from Bonners Ferry, Idaho that crashed near Granite Falls. The FBI placed a $10,000 bounty for information leading to his arrest. Federal agents believed he was also responsible for the stolen plane in Indiana. After the plane was found crashed in the Bahamas, local police on the islands began searching for the person who had stolen it. On July 11, 2010, officers picked up a trail on the island of Eleuthera. They had recovered a 44-foot power boat that had been stolen from a marina on Great Abaco Island. The officers tracked the suspect to Harbor Island. Just before dawn, they found him on a stolen boat. When they tried to arrest him, he attempted to flee. The police shot out the engine of the boat, stopping him. Before they could take him into custody, he put a gun to his own head. The officers talked to him and convinced him not to shoot himself. He was arrested without further violence. After his arrest, he told police that he had planned to go to Cuba to mislead authorities, and then to the Turks and Caicos Islands. His mother had previously said she hoped he would go to a country that did not have an extradition treaty with the United States. But now he was in custody in the Bahamas. On July 13, 2010, he appeared in a Bahamian court and pleaded guilty to illegal entry and illegally landing a plane. He was sentenced to 3 months in jail or a $300 fine. His mother wired the money to the U.S. Embassy in Nassau, and the fine was paid. He was deported the same day. He was flown overnight to Miami, Florida, with Bahamian authorities and FBI agents. On July 14, 2010, he appeared before a U.S. magistrate judge in Miami. The judge discussed his legal representation, which his mother had already hired for him. 2 days later, the judge ruled that he would be sent to Washington State to face charges there first, because the warrant from Washington was the one under which he had been arrested. He waived his right to an extradition hearing, meaning he agreed to be moved without a fight. He was held in a federal detention center in Miami until July 21st, when he was transferred to the federal detention center in SeaTac, Washington. He was transported in handcuffs and leg irons. Once in Washington, a federal judge set a deadline for prosecutors to formally indict him. He waived his right to a speedy trial, which gave both sides more time to prepare. On November 18, 2010, he pleaded not guilty in federal court to charges that included interstate transportation of a stolen plane, a stolen boat, and a stolen gun, as well as being a fugitive in possession of a firearm and flying a plane without a pilot's license. On June 17, 2011, federal prosecutors recommended that he be sentenced to 6 years in prison. He then pleaded guilty to all 7 counts on the federal indictment. He also faced state charges in Washington for break-ins and burglaries. The prosecutors in state court asked for a term of 9.5 years. His lawyers asked for 6 years, pointing to psychiatric reports that described his difficult childhood. On December 16, 2011, he was sentenced in Island County Superior Court to more than 7 years in prison. The judge described his childhood as a mind-numbing absence of hope, but said he appeared genuinely sorry for what he had done. He told the court that he planned to use his time in prison to study and later earn a degree in aeronautical engineering. On January 27, 2012, a federal judge in Seattle sentenced him to 6.5 years in prison for the federal crimes. The federal sentence was ordered to run alongside his state sentence, not separately. During that hearing, he told the court that it was no stretch to say he was lucky to be alive. In July 2016, he was released on parole to a halfway house near Seattle. He found a job doing clerical work at his defense attorney's law firm. His parole officer later blocked an effort he made to raise money online for flight school, stating that any money raised had to go toward the $129,000 in restitution he owed to the victims of his crimes. The story of Colton Harrismore, the teenager who became known as the Barefoot Bandit, ended with his release from prison and his return to a quiet life under supervision, while the people and businesses he stole from waited to be repaid. Story 6. Stephen Mark McDaniel was born on September 20th, 1985. He grew up in the suburbs outside Atlanta, Georgia. His father, Mark McDaniel, worked in a professional field, and the family lived in a stable, middle-class home. Stephen was an only child. Neighbors described the family as quiet and ordinary. As a boy, Stephen attended local public schools. Teachers remembered him as a bright student who kept to himself. He did well in his classes, but did not join many clubs or sports. He spent much of his free time alone, reading or using the family computer. His parents encouraged him to focus on his schoolwork and later on a career in law. After high school, Stephen enrolled at Mercer University in Macon, Georgia. He chose to study political science and eventually set his sights on law school. During his undergraduate years, he remained a quiet student. He earned good grades but did not form close friendships. Professors noted that he was polite but distant. In the fall of 2008, Stephen moved into an apartment complex called Barrister's Hall, which was popular with law students. His apartment was next door to another law student named Lauren Teresa Giddings. Lauren was from Maryland, the oldest of 3 sisters, and known for being warm and outgoing. She and Stephen were classmates at Mercer's law school. They both joined the Federalist Society, a student group focused on legal issues. Stephen served as the vice president of the chapter, and Lauren served as the president. They worked together on events and knew each other through school, but they were not close friends. Stephen continued through law school without major incident. He graduated in the same class as Lauren. After graduation, both stayed in their apartments at Barrister's Hall to study for the Georgia bar exam. The summer of 2011 was hot, and most other students had left the complex. Stephen spent long hours alone in his apartment, keeping a regular routine. Lauren had returned from her sister's wedding in Maryland and told her family she would be studying intensely for the exam. The 2 neighbors lived side by side, separated only by a wall. Each went about their daily life without any outward sign of trouble. In the weeks before the crime, Stephen McDaniel began to study Lauren Giddings's routines. He lived in the apartment next to hers at Barrister's Hall, and he noticed that the building was mostly empty because other students had left after graduation. He knew that Lauren was alone. He also knew that she was focused on studying for the bar exam and that she kept her door locked. McDaniel had access to a master key for the apartment complex. He had obtained it at some point while living there. In the early morning hours of Sunday, June 26, 2011, he decided to use that key. At 4:30 a.m., he put on a mask and gloves. He left his own apartment, walked to Lauren's door, and let himself in with the master key. The building was dark and quiet. No one else was around. He went to Lauren's bedroom. She was asleep. Using his hands, he strangled her. She fought back. During the struggle, her fingernails scratched his stomach, leaving fresh marks on his skin. But he continued until she stopped moving. He had killed her inside her own bedroom. After the killing, McDaniel did not leave immediately. He stayed in the apartment. He moved Lauren's body into the bathroom. There, he used a hacksaw to dismember the body. The process took time. He worked carefully to avoid making noise that would alert neighbors. Once he had cut the body into pieces, he needed to remove the remains from the apartment. He collected most of the pieces and placed them in a bag. He carried that bag to a dumpster located on the Mercer University campus. The dumpster was a place where trash was collected regularly. He left the bag there. One part of the body, the torso, he placed inside a trash can that was outside the apartment complex, near the building where they both lived. He then returned to his own apartment, cleaned himself, and disposed of the gloves, mask, and any clothing he had worn. The next day, Monday, June 27th, Lauren did not contact her family or friends. They noticed her silence, but initially believed she was simply studying hard, as she had said she would. McDaniel went about his normal activities. He remained in his apartment. He did not report anything unusual. On Wednesday, June 29th, Lauren's friends and family grew worried because she had not answered calls or texts. Her sister Caitlin tried reaching her and found that her phone went straight to voicemail. When multiple friends confirmed they had not heard from her, the family contacted the Macon police. Lauren's father drove to Macon to file a missing person report. By that time, McDaniel was aware that people were looking for Lauren. He had seen some of her friends checking on her apartment. He did not say anything to them. Instead, he prepared to appear as a concerned neighbor. On Thursday, June 30th, a local news station, WGXA, came to Barristers Hall to report on Lauren's disappearance. McDaniel walked up to the reporter and gave an interview. In the interview, he said he was a friend of Lauren's and expressed concern. During that live interview, the reporter received news that a torso had been found in a trash can outside the apartment complex. McDaniel heard this information while the camera was still recording. His expression changed when he learned that the torso had been recovered, but he continued to speak as if he was surprised. Later that same day, McDaniel went to the police station along with other neighbors and friends of Lauren. They were there to give statements about her disappearance. McDaniel sat down with detectives and began talking. He allowed them to ask questions. He acted cooperative, but when detectives asked to search his apartment, he refused. He explained his refusal by saying, "It's the lawyer in me," and said he was always protective of his space. The detectives noted that McDaniel had fresh scratches on his stomach. They could see the marks through his shirt or when he moved. When they asked him about the scratches, he said he must have cut himself while sleeping. At that point, the police had not yet charged him with a crime. They had found the torso. They knew Lauren was dead. They also knew that the person who killed her had used a master key and had dismembered the body with a saw. But they had not yet linked McDaniel to the murder beyond his scratches, his access to a key, and his behavior. McDaniel remained at the police station for hours. The interrogation continued past midnight and into July 1st. Eventually, he allowed detectives to walk through his apartment, but only if he was present. They looked around, but did not immediately find the hacksaw or other evidence. Still, the scratches on his stomach, his refusal to consent to a search earlier, and his reaction during the television interview made the detectives focus on him as the main suspect. By the early morning of July 1st, after more than 12 hours of questioning, police placed McDaniel under arrest. He was taken to jail, where he would stay as the investigation continued. After Stephen McDaniel was taken to jail on July 1st, 2011, detectives continued their investigation. They did not charge him with murder right away. Instead, they held him while they gathered physical evidence. They obtained search warrants for his apartment and for his personal belongings. During the search, they found a hacksaw. Forensic tests showed that the hacksaw had been used to dismember Lauren Gittings's body. They also found other items that linked him to the crime, including the master key to the apartment complex. Investigators examined McDaniel's personal computer. On the hard drive, they discovered video files that he had recorded. The videos showed him standing outside Lauren's apartment window on the same night he killed her. He had filmed her through the window without her knowledge. This footage proved that he had been watching her before he entered her apartment with the master key. It showed that the murder was planned ahead of time. While McDaniel was in jail, the police also looked into other activities. They found evidence on his computer of child sexual exploitation material. That discovery led to additional charges. In August 2011, more than a month after his arrest, prosecutors formally charged McDaniel with murder, burglary, and 30 counts of sexual exploitation of children. Lauren's family and friends waited as the case moved through the court system. Most of Lauren's remains were never recovered. Only her torso had been found in the trash can outside the apartments. The rest of her body, which McDaniel had placed in the dumpster on campus, was taken away by trash collection and never located. For 3 years, the case did not go to trial. McDaniel's lawyers negotiated with prosecutors. In 2014, McDaniel agreed to a plea deal. Under the deal, he pleaded guilty to murder. In exchange, prosecutors agreed to drop the death penalty as a possible punishment. They also dismissed the burglary charge and the 30 counts of sexual exploitation. The judge accepted the agreement. As part of the plea, McDaniel had to give an account of the murder. He described how he used the master key, how he strangled Lauren, and how he dismembered her body. He confirmed the details that investigators had already uncovered. The judge sentenced him to life in prison. Under Georgia law, a life sentence made him eligible for parole after 30 years. His earliest possible parole date was set for 2041. After the sentencing, McDaniel was transferred to the Georgia State Prison System. He was initially held at a diagnostic facility and later moved to a permanent prison. Lauren's family returned to their lives in Maryland, continuing to grieve the loss of their daughter and sister. In the years that followed, McDaniel sought to challenge his conviction. In 2018, his father started an online fundraising campaign to raise money for legal expenses related to an appeal. The fundraising page was taken down shortly after it was created. That same year, McDaniel filed court papers asking for a retrial. He represented himself in those proceedings. He argued that his constitutional rights had been violated, claiming he was not medically cleared before giving consent to searches, that his legal research had been intercepted by prosecutors, and that his original lawyers had not represented him properly. He also filed a malpractice complaint against his former defense attorney. The judge reviewed his arguments and denied the request for a new trial. In 2022, McDaniel filed another legal petition, this time a habeas corpus petition. He claimed that documents from his defense trial preparations had been stolen by the district attorney. He asked for his conviction to be overturned and for his release from prison. That petition remained pending for a period, but it did not result in his release. As of June 2024, Stephen McDaniel remained incarcerated at Hancock State Prison in Hancock County, Georgia, serving his life sentence. Lauren Gittings's murder had been solved through the careful work of investigators who found the hacksaw, the computer videos, and the physical evidence that tied him to the crime, and the plea deal ensured he would spend decades in prison without the possibility of parole until 2041. The story of Lauren Gittings ends with her memory preserved by those who loved her and with the man who took her life confined behind prison walls. Story 7. Markeith DeMangslow Lloyd was born on October 8, 1975, in Orlando, Florida. He was raised in the Carver Shores neighborhood, a residential area in West Orlando. His family lived in a modest home, and he grew up with siblings in the household. During his childhood, neighbors and family members described him as a normal boy. He attended local schools in Orange County. There is no public record of serious behavioral problems during his early school years. He completed his basic education and entered adulthood in the Orlando area. As a young man, Lloyd held various jobs. He worked in security, which later became a point of reference because he owned clothing and equipment associated with that field. He was known to be physically fit and stood over 6 feet tall. People who knew him said he could be quiet at times, but also had a temper that would show itself in personal relationships. Lloyd had a series of romantic relationships. One of those relationships was with a woman named Sod Dixon. They were together for a period and had children. The relationship eventually ended, but they remained connected because of their children. During the years before the events that would later come to light, Lloyd had occasional encounters with law enforcement for minor matters, but nothing that resulted in a long prison sentence. Family members on both sides described Lloyd as someone who could become angry and difficult after a breakup. There were concerns among those close to him about his behavior, though no formal complaints were filed that led to criminal charges in the years prior. He continued to live in Orlando, staying in the same general area where he had grown up. His life moved forward without any major public incidents until the final months of 2016. He remained in contact with his children and occasionally saw Sod Dixon when arrangements were made. By the end of that year, tensions had grown between them, and those close to the situation noticed that Lloyd's behavior was becoming more unpredictable. By December 2016, the tensions between Markeith Lloyd and his ex-girlfriend Sod Dixon had grown worse. Dixon was 24 years old. She had 2 children, ages 2 and 8, and she was 3 months pregnant with another child. Lloyd was the father of at least one of her children. The two were no longer in a relationship, but they still had contact because of the children. On the night of December 13th, 2016, Lloyd went to Dixon's home in the Pine Hills area of Orange County. He arrived around 9:15 p.m. He walked up to the front door and knocked. When Dixon opened the door, Lloyd pulled out a gun and began shooting. He shot her 8 times. She fell inside the doorway. Dixon's brother, Ronald Stewart, was also in the home. He was 26 years old. When he heard the gunshots, he came to see what was happening. Lloyd then shot Stewart as well. Stewart was hit but survived. He was taken to the hospital in critical condition. Doctors expected him to recover. Witnesses in the area reported hearing about 10 gunshots. After the shooting, Lloyd fled the scene. Police responded to the home and found Dixon dead. They also found Stewart wounded. Investigators quickly identified Lloyd as the shooter. He had a known history with Dixon, and witnesses placed him at the scene. The Orange County Sheriff's Office issued a warrant for his arrest. They announced that Lloyd was considered armed and dangerous. Lloyd went into hiding after the killing. He did not turn himself in. For several weeks, law enforcement searched for him. They asked the public for tips. Dixon's family held a news conference and asked Lloyd to surrender, but he remained out of sight. On the morning of January 9th, 2017, Lloyd went to a Walmart store on John Young Parkway in Orlando. He was wearing camouflage pants, black shoes, and a black shirt that had the word security printed on it. He was also wearing a bulletproof vest. The vest was similar to the ones used by the Orlando Police Department. A woman inside the Walmart recognized Lloyd. She knew he was wanted for the murder of Sod Dixon. The woman saw an Orlando police lieutenant named Deborah Clayton, who was also at the store at the time. The woman told Lieutenant Clayton that Lloyd was in the store. Lieutenant Clayton was 42 years old. She had been with the Orlando Police Department for many years. When she learned that Lloyd was nearby, she moved to confront him. As she approached, Lloyd drew his gun. Clayton turned to run toward the parking lot. Lloyd fired 3 rounds at her. 1 bullet hit her in the right hip. The force of the shot caused her to fall forward, and she struck her face on the pavement. Even after falling, Clayton was still able to return fire. She lay on the ground and fired 7 shots toward Lloyd. While she was down, Lloyd moved around her and continued shooting. He fired multiple rounds. Clayton was hit 4 times in total. The first shot was to her hip. A second bullet shattered her hip bone. A third hit her thigh. The final shot went through her neck and lodged in her shoulder. Later, the medical examiner's office determined that this final shot was fired while Lloyd was standing over her. Both Clayton and Lloyd fired their weapons 8 times during the exchange. Lloyd used the same gun he had used to kill Sod Dixon 3 weeks earlier. After shooting Clayton, Lloyd ran to a dark green Mercury and drove away from the parking lot. Officers arrived quickly and found Clayton on the ground. 3 officers performed CPR on her until paramedics came. She was taken to Orlando Regional Medical Center, where she was pronounced dead at 7:40 a.m. While fleeing, Lloyd drove through the area. At some point during his escape, he encountered a deputy in an unmarked car. Lloyd fired shots at the deputy. The deputy was not hit. Lloyd then abandoned the Green Mercury and committed a carjacking. He approached a driver in a 2013 Volkswagen Passat and forced the driver out at gunpoint. He took the car and continued driving. Lloyd later abandoned the Volkswagen at Brookside Apartments. Inside the car, he left his clothes. Officers found a hole in his shirt that showed he had been shot in the chest during the exchange with Clayton. However, because he was wearing the bulletproof vest, the bullet did not enter his body. He was injured but not seriously. After these events, law enforcement launched a large manhunt for Lloyd. He remained at large. The search continued for more than a week, with police and federal authorities working together to locate him. Tips came in from the public, and officers followed leads. Lloyd tried to change his appearance. Some tips suggested he had shaved his head to avoid being recognized. On January 17, 2017, the U.S. Marshals Service added Lloyd to its list of the top 15 most wanted fugitives in the nation. A reward was offered for information leading to his arrest. On the same day Lloyd was added to the most wanted list, January 17, 2017, law enforcement officers located him. Investigators had developed information that Lloyd was hiding in an abandoned house at 1157 Lescott Lane in the Carver Shores neighborhood of Orlando, the same area where he had grown up. Officers surrounded the house. Lloyd came out of the house wearing body armor. He was carrying 2 guns. One of the guns had a drum magazine that could hold 100 rounds. He first tried to leave through the back of the house, but found officers there. He then moved to the front door, dropped his weapons, and stepped out. He lay flat on his stomach on the ground. Police officers approached him. Helicopter footage showed one officer kick Lloyd while he was on the ground. Officers later explained that they were concerned Lloyd might still have a weapon hidden under his body armor. A large bag of ammunition was found underneath him. Officers also reported that Lloyd did not immediately put his hands behind his back as commanded. The officers involved remained on duty, and the use of force was investigated. Lloyd suffered injuries during the arrest, including damage to his left eye, which he later claimed was removed. He also had abrasions and swelling on his face. Lloyd was taken to Orlando Regional Medical Center for treatment of his facial injuries. After being treated, he was transferred to the Orange County Jail. During his first court appearance, he appeared with a bandage over his left eye. He told the judge that police had broken his nose and jaw and taken his eye. Police officials described his injuries as minor. No officers were injured during the capture. Orlando Police Chief John Mina announced that Lloyd was handcuffed using the handcuffs that had belonged to Lieutenant Deborah Clayton. This was done as a tradition to honor fallen officers. Lloyd faced multiple charges. The Orange County Sheriff's Office charged him with 2 counts of first-degree murder with a firearm, one for Sod Dixon and one for Lieutenant Clayton. He was also charged with aggravated assault with a firearm, attempted murder for shooting Ronald Stewart, and carjacking. Additional charges were added later. During the investigation, authorities also looked into the events of the manhunt on the day of Lieutenant Clayton's killing. On that same day, Orange County Sheriff's Deputy First Class Norman Lewis had been killed in a traffic accident while participating in the search for Lloyd. Deputy Lewis was 35 years old. He was riding a motorcycle when a van driven by an elderly woman collided with him. The woman was later fined and had her license suspended for 6 months. The deputy's death was ruled an accident, but it was directly tied to the emergency response set in motion by Lloyd's actions. Lloyd's trial for the murder of Sod Dixon came first. In that case, the prosecution sought the death penalty. However, the jury unanimously voted against a death sentence. Instead, Lloyd was sentenced to life in prison for Dixon's murder. His trial for the murder of Lieutenant Deborah Clayton followed. The trial took place in late 2022. During the proceedings, Lloyd's defense team argued that he had acted in self-defense when he shot Clayton. They also argued that he was legally insane at the time. Mental health experts testified that Lloyd suffered from delusional beliefs. The judge ruled that Lloyd was competent to stand trial, and the insanity defense was rejected. The defense also tried to argue that Lloyd had suffered brain damage during his arrest, but the officers involved had been cleared of wrongdoing. In November 2022, the jury found Lloyd guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Lieutenant Clayton. During the penalty phase, the same jury heard evidence about the crime and Lloyd's background. The jury unanimously recommended the death sentence. In December 2022, Circuit Judge Letitia Marquez formally sentenced Markeith Lloyd to death for the murder of Lieutenant Deborah Clayton. After the sentence, Lloyd was transferred to Union Correctional Institution, a prison that houses inmates sentenced to death in Florida. Lieutenant Clayton was posthumously promoted from sergeant to lieutenant by the Orlando Police Department. Lloyd filed an appeal to the Florida Supreme Court. On April 26, 2022, before his sentencing was finalized, the court heard oral arguments. His defense argued that prosecutors had made improper statements to the jury and had played emotional music during a presentation about Clayton's life. The state argued that the defense's claims were taken out of context and that the jury's decision was sound. As of the time of his sentencing, the appeal remained pending, but the death sentence was allowed to proceed. The case concluded with Lloyd serving a life sentence for the murder of Sod Dixon and facing execution by the state of Florida for the murder of Lieutenant Deborah Clayton. For the families of the victims, the legal proceedings brought an end to years of waiting, but the losses they suffered remained permanent. Daniel William Marsh was born on May 14, 1997. He grew up in Davis, California, a quiet college town. His parents were married, but the marriage was not stable. From a young age, Daniel was described by people who knew him as a bright but difficult child. When Daniel was 10 years old, something happened that made him a local hero. In 2008, his father had a heart attack at home. Daniel performed CPR on his father and helped save his life. For this, he received the American Red Cross Heroes Award. People in the community saw him as a brave and quick-thinking boy. But that same year, Daniel's family began to break apart. His mother started an affair with his former kindergarten teacher. The affair led to a bitter divorce between Daniel's parents. The divorce was contentious and filled with conflict. Daniel was caught in the middle. Around that time, Daniel began to have dark thoughts. He was 10 years old when he first started having fantasies about killing people. He was angry at the woman his mother had left his father for. He thought about slitting her throat or strangling her. These were not passing thoughts. They stayed with him. When Daniel was 11, he told a therapist about his fantasies. He said he wanted to torture people and wanted to make those fantasies real. The therapist noted this but did not stop the thoughts from growing. At age 11, Daniel was diagnosed with adjustment disorder with depressed mood. He started seeing a clinical social worker named David Besa in May 2010. The intake form noted that Daniel had nightmares, temper outbursts, and that he was nervous and did not like other people. In August 2010, he was prescribed Prozac, his first antidepressant. Daniel moved between his parents' homes after the divorce. His father and mother had different rules and different ways of dealing with him. As he entered his teenage years, he started drinking alcohol and using marijuana. His father grew tired of Daniel's constant drunkenness and drug use. When Daniel was 14, his father threw him out of the house. His mother, meanwhile, did not seem to know how much Daniel was drinking and using drugs. In 7th grade, Daniel began threatening physical harm to others at school. Teachers and counselors took notice. In October 2011, when Daniel was 14, he stopped eating properly. He became anorexic. His weight dropped to 93 pounds. The following month, he was placed in an intensive outpatient program for his eating disorder. From December 29, 2011, to January 25, 2012, Daniel was hospitalized at Berkeley Hospital for the eating disorder. While there, doctors tried different medications. He had been taking Celexa. They switched him to Lexapro, then back to Prozac. They also gave him Abilify, an antipsychotic. A doctor noted that Daniel was having feelings of derealization. He felt as if he were outside his own body 4 to 5 times a week. The violent thoughts did not go away. They became more frequent. At 14, Daniel's dreams about killing people, which had started when he was 10, happened more often. In mid-December 2012, Daniel told a school counselor about his homicidal fantasies. The school took it seriously enough to call the police. Daniel was taken to a hospital against his will because officials believed he was a danger to himself and others. During this time, his medication was changed again. He was given Zoloft and Seroquel. In early 2013, Daniel told his school psychologist that he was having homicidal thoughts about other students. When the counselor asked if he would act on them, Daniel said, "I have full confidence that I could hurt these people." Police were called again. This time, they determined that Daniel did not pose a danger, and no further action was taken. Soon after, Daniel had another meeting with the school counselor. This time he described in graphic detail how he wanted to torture people. He talked about peeling skin from their hands and cutting off their eyelids. He said that these fantasies only scratched the surface of his thoughts, and that he had stopped trying to fight them. The counselor did not report these statements to authorities because there was no identified victim and no stated intent to act immediately. By this time, Daniel was taking Wellbutrin in addition to other medications. His violent thoughts continued. Whenever he looked at a person, he thought about how he would kill them. He began drawing violent pictures in art class. The drawings showed torture and killing, with detailed methods. He also became interested in serial killers like Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer. He started visiting a website that showed videos of real gore and violence. Daniel also began harming animals. He killed cats. One friend later said Daniel strangled a cat in the street. When the friend asked why, Daniel replied, "Well, I just wanted to do it. I hated that cat." He also kicked a dog and killed a raccoon. He asked the same friend if he could kill his dog. Daniel's friends later recalled that he often talked about killing people. He said that if he were ever caught for murder, he would claim insanity. He also made a detailed written plan to kill his girlfriend's ex-boyfriend. Despite all of this, Daniel continued to move through his daily life. He went to school. He saw doctors. He took medications. He lived with his mother. His violent fantasies were always present, but no one outside his small circle knew the full extent of them. His mother had a neurological illness that sometimes left her unable to care for herself, and Daniel showed no concern for her condition. A friend of his mother's noticed that Daniel showed no emotion toward her, even when she cried. The thoughts that had begun when he was 10 years old had grown stronger each year. By the spring of 2013, Daniel was 15 years old. He had spent 5 years imagining how to kill people. He had told counselors, therapists, and friends about his desires. He had been hospitalized, medicated, and sent home. The systems meant to help him had not stopped the fantasies. They had only documented them. By the spring of 2013, Daniel had reached a point where his fantasies were no longer enough. On the night of April 13th, he decided that he had waited long enough. He was 15 years old, and he was ready to make his fantasies real. Before leaving his mother's house, Daniel prepared carefully. He wanted to make sure he would not be caught. He took tape and wrapped it around the bottom of his shoes so that he would not leave footprints. He put on gloves so that he would not leave fingerprints or DNA. He wore all black clothing and a black face mask to hide his appearance. He armed himself with a 6-inch buck knife. In the early morning hours of April 14th, between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., Daniel left his mother's home. He walked through the streets of Davis. He was looking for a house that had an open window or an open door. He checked between 40 and 50 homes. He walked for some time until he came to a condominium that was 2 doors down from his father's residence. At that condominium, Daniel found an open window. He used his knife to slice open the window screen. Then he climbed through the window and went inside. He stood in the living room and listened. He heard snoring coming from the master bedroom. He followed the sound to the bedroom door. He opened the door and walked in. Inside the bedroom, 2 people were asleep in bed. They were an older couple. Their names were Oliver Northup and Claudia Maupin. Oliver was 87 years old. Claudia was 76. They had been married since 1996. Daniel did not know them. He had not chosen them for any personal reason. He had simply found a window that was open. Daniel stood beside their bed and watched them sleep. He later said he stood there for about 10 minutes. He felt nervous, but also excited and exhilarated. He watched them and thought about how he would kill them. Then Claudia woke up. She saw Daniel standing over the bed and began to scream. Daniel started stabbing her with the knife. He stabbed her in the torso. Claudia screamed for help and begged him to stop. Daniel later told investigators that her cries for help made him attack her more. He stabbed her again and again. Oliver woke up. Daniel turned to him and began stabbing him as well. He stabbed Oliver until he was sure he was dead. Daniel later said that he continued stabbing both of them even after they were dead because it just felt right. When the stabbing was over, Daniel did not leave. He began to cut the bodies open. He wanted to see what was inside. He removed organs from both bodies. He pulled fat out of Claudia's leg and torso. He cut open Oliver's forehead because he was curious about what it looked like. He tried to take Claudia's eye out with the knife, but found it too difficult. He took a cell phone and pushed it inside Claudia's abdomen. He took a drinking glass and pushed it inside Oliver's abdomen. He later said he put those items inside the bodies to fuck with the people who would later investigate the murders. The attack was severe. Claudia suffered 74 wounds across her body. 67 of those were stab wounds. One of the stab wounds knocked out a tooth. Oliver suffered 65 wounds across his body. 61 of those were stab wounds. In total, Daniel inflicted more than 128 stab wounds on the 2 victims. After he finished, Daniel left the condominium. He went back to his mother's house. He kept the knife he had used. He kept the bloody clothes he had worn. He kept them as souvenirs. The feeling he got from killing stayed with him. He later described it as pure happiness and said it was better than sex. He said the feeling was strongest when the victims were awake and fighting back. The good feeling lasted for weeks. In the days after the murders, Daniel began planning to kill again. He walked the streets at night looking for more victims. He carried a baseball bat with him. He decided that if he killed someone with the bat, people would not connect those murders to the stabbing deaths of Oliver and Claudia. He did not find anyone on those nights, but he was ready to do it again. On the morning of April 14th, after he returned home, Daniel talked to a close friend. He told the friend that he had committed the murders. The next day, during lunch at school, he told the same friend again and also told other friends. After school, he asked his girlfriend if she had heard about the murders. When she said no, Daniel began describing what he had done. He smiled as he talked. He explained how great he had felt. His girlfriend did not believe him at first. The next day, Daniel described the crime again to a close friend. He smiled again and said it was the best experience he had ever had. A few days later, on April 16th, that same friend asked Daniel about the murders again. Daniel again said it was the best feeling in his life. Then he showed the friend the knife, the gloves, the ski cap, the boots, and the jacket he had worn that night. The friend did not know what to say. Daniel's friends and his girlfriend talked to each other about what Daniel had told them. They were afraid of him. They did not immediately tell anyone else. In May 2013, Daniel was expelled from school. He had been caught carrying a knife on campus. His girlfriend broke up with him on June 4th. She later said she broke up with him because he intimidated her. About 1 or 2 weeks later, around midnight, Daniel entered her house through the dog door. The girlfriend was terrified. She told Daniel's friend about what had happened. On the morning of April 14th, 2013, Oliver Northup and Claudia Maupin were not at church. That was unusual for them. Their family grew concerned. Oliver's daughter, Mary, tried calling the couple but got no answer. Oliver also failed to show up for a performance with his folk band. Later that day, Oliver's son Robert and one of his grandsons went to the condominium to check on them. They looked around and left, thinking Oliver and Claudia had gone out of town. That evening, Claudia's daughter Laura went to the condominium with the police. Laura rang the doorbell. No one answered. She walked around to the back of the house and saw that one of the windows was open. The screen had been cut. She looked through the bedroom window and saw bloodstains. The police used a flashlight to look inside and saw the bodies. They forced their way in and discovered what had happened. The investigation began immediately. 25 FBI agents joined the local police. They searched for evidence, but the killer had been careful. There were no fingerprints, no footprints, no DNA, and no other physical evidence left behind. The police had no suspect and no way to identify who had done this. For 2 months, the case remained unsolved. During that time, Daniel Marsh had been telling people about what he had done. His friends and ex-girlfriend knew, but they were afraid of him. Finally, Daniel's friend made a decision. Daniel had threatened to kill again. The friend went to the police and told them everything. On June 17, 2013, a resource officer at Daniel's school brought him in for questioning. 2 detectives, one from the Davis Police and one from the FBI, interrogated him. At first, Daniel denied everything. He cried and begged the investigators to believe him. The interrogation lasted 3 hours and 38 minutes. The detectives confronted Daniel with information they had gathered from his friends. Eventually, Daniel began to confess. He explained how he had left his mother's house, how he had searched for an open window, how he had watched the couple sleep, and how he had stabbed them. He described in detail how he had cut open their bodies and put a phone and a glass inside them. He admitted that the murders gave him a feeling of pure happiness, and that the feeling had lasted for weeks. When one of the detectives asked Daniel how he would kill him, Daniel described several ways, including choking him with his tie and using broken glass to cut his arteries. He told the investigators that all the evidence they needed was in his mother's garage. Police searched the garage and found the bloody clothes and the knife Daniel had used. He had kept them as souvenirs. Daniel was arrested that same day. He was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The charges included special circumstances, killing more than one person, lying in wait, and torture. Because he was 15 at the time of the murders, he could not face the death penalty or life without parole. He initially pleaded not guilty, then changed his plea to not guilty by reason of insanity. His trial began on September 2, 2014. He was 17 by then and was being tried as an adult. The trial lasted 5 weeks. The prosecution argued that Daniel had planned the murders carefully and knew what he was doing. The defense argued that the medications he was taking, combined with mental illness, made him temporarily insane. Witnesses included investigators, doctors, and Daniel's own friends and ex-girlfriend. On September 26, 2014, the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. They found Daniel guilty on both counts of first-degree murder and all special circumstances. The jury then had to decide whether Daniel was sane at the time of the crimes. For days later, they returned with the answer: Daniel was sane. At the sentencing hearing, family members of Oliver and Claudia gave statements. Claudia's eldest daughter spoke about how her mother had lived her life loving people. Oliver's son described how the trauma of the murders had affected his health. The prosecutor asked for the maximum sentence. The defense asked for the minimum. The judge sentenced Daniel to 52 years to life in prison. The sentence was made up of 25 years to life for each murder, plus 2 years for the special enhancements. The judge explained that Daniel had been proud of his crime, had mutilated the bodies out of curiosity, and had tried to commit more murders afterward. Even with that sentence, California law gave Daniel a chance to be considered for parole after 25 years because he was a juvenile when he committed the crimes. After the conviction, new state laws changed how juvenile offenders are handled. In 2018, a new law prevented juveniles under 16 from being tried in adult court. Daniel's lawyers argued that this law should apply to him retroactively. If it did, he would have been moved to the juvenile justice system and released when he turned 25. Prosecutors argued that the law did not apply to him because his case was already final. The courts heard arguments for several years. In September 2021, the 3rd District Court of Appeal dismissed Daniel's appeal. His adult conviction remained in place. Daniel William Marsh is now incarcerated at Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility in San Diego. He is eligible for parole in December 2036. Oliver Northup and Claudia Maupin were buried by their families, who have continued to speak publicly about the harm that was done to them and about the importance of justice for victims of violent crime. The story of that night in Davis, California, is closed, but the consequences of it continue for everyone who was touched by it.